a systematic racism. Soon you will be through. You keep killing all my brothers and sisters. Just don't get no rest. You chase them down and shoot them up. Keep taking away our best. No hiding from the videos. And now the world can see what's been happening to my brothers. Justice is what we need. Black lives truly matters. Black lives truly matters.
Good morning. Welcome back to the second hour of Lovebabz, Lovetalk. I'm Babz Rawls Ivy, and woo, I am delighted to have Enroue back. Hello, darling.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
You know what? This is perfect to have you after the conversation we just had. You know, we do Word on the Street, and, you know, Word on the Street, Enroue, is a little slice of New Haven life, New Haven, Hamden life, of real folks out there in the streets. And we run up on them. It's unrehearsed. It's unscripted. We just run up on folks and ask them, what's the word on the street? And whatever it is for them, like whatever they feel like they want to share with us. Mm-hmm. And it has been an amazing experience to sort of hear from folks who are up against it or not up against it, but just different slices of people's lives about what they think the word on the street is for them. And it's been incredible. This year, we just talked to this guy who was homeless for 10 years and is an addict, right? And still struggling with his addiction, but has been clean for a long time, but is still very present. Sure. And I just was like, man, you know, it's a heavy walk some people get to take, heavy walk. So anyway, how are you, brother? How are you?
I'm good. Got some water in one hand, got a little coffee in the other. Trying to do that kind of balancing. Had a wonderful time. Went for a walk and ended up spending most of my time standing at the foot of West Rock by the West River, just being there, just honing in, being present, being really open to just my life in the day, in the morning, and the mist, and the chill, and the water moving, and the birds. Just really that piece around, can I embody this life, and on its terms, right? Not just kind of what I want or what I don't want, or what I like or don't like, but there's also this experience that's here, and can I keep showing up for what this experience is, what this time is, what this life is. You know, light, fluffy stuff in the morning, you know, just
I wouldn't say light, fluffy, because I think I think that's a practice that, you know, you've learned how to sort of give yourself what you need. And I think that's where the disconnect with people is. They don't know how to give themselves what they need that is healing and helpful. People know how to, you know, give themselves drugs and alcohol and all the things that they think gives them some peace or solace or some erasure of what is happening in their world. But what you're talking about is something else.
Yeah, and I was, you know, it's a little flippant to say like, oh, it's kind of light and fluffy. And I think it's actually really powerful. The person you just spoke with, you know, there's the culture that we're in reinforces just to keep moving and running, right? So we actually aren't encouraged to develop a way of really being with ourselves and even being curious about what that even means. That might be distinct from what the message is of who we should be or ought to be or how we should be showing up or how we're not enough or whatever are. And, you know, I had as I've shared, I've had, my own struggles with addiction. I've been sober since 1992. And, that the journey of not hiding from myself is an ongoing journey, an ongoing process, an ongoing part of the practice. Like, how do I keep turning in, not as like, outside is too much, but like, oh, there's something in here which is connected to kind of regular life and is very different, seems very different and distinct from, what we're told to kind of like, oh, when I do this kind of job or get this kind of education, live this kind of life and kind of provide for, and this is how I'm supposed to show up. And being in nature helps, and the practices I have really helped me to also pause and leave space for another way of being that I don't necessarily have figured out in the same way, or have a map that's laid out in the same way as what kind of U.S. popular culture says my life should be about and how I should be living. Both connected to and separate from all the identities that I have. What does it mean to be a parent? If you're a parent, this is how you should be, and this is how you're supposed to raise, into the, and the judgments that's with that, and the messages that are with that. And there might be something else. There might be lots of ways to be a parent. And how do I discover, with my values and with what I'm leaning into, the ways that I can be a parent to the particular people who are my children, right? Not just like a parent. And that requires not like vigilance, but kind of like, presence. Oh, am I actually in that, as I'm making breakfast, right? How am I being with myself and with them in that, right? It's not that I always like, oh, I'm doing it for you, this is the thing for you, but like, oh, am I even present to this moment? Because as we know, these moments are actually quite precious and fragile, and things can change very quickly. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's part of that practice this morning, and is counter to the tools that get cultivated in this culture for lots of people in lots of different ways.
Well, I don't know what we want to move toward talking about today. I don't know if you had something specific, but this seems like a good path to sort of stay on, because I've been hearing a lot about people and identity, in all the ways that we identify ourselves and the roles, and people are very, very clear about compartmentalizing each role of themselves. I used to be very good at that too. Like, I used to this is who I am over here. This is who I'm over here. Right. I code switch over here. And now, as I'm aging and I learned something about the world, and I learned a lot about myself, I don't do that anymore. Like, everything is just one room. Yeah. I'm in one room now.
Yeah. That has taken a lot of practice also. I had a very similar, I did lots of different things, which most of the people in those arenas didn't communicate with each other. So when I was in college, I was on the varsity basketball team. I was also a psychology major. I was also really, really caring about the environment and the earth. I was also doing a lot of drugs. I was also in the dance department. And those circles of people didn't necessarily intermingle.
Right.
But I did. Right. And so there's an aspect of that which I think is fine. Like, oh, I'm here. This is just the thing that I'm plugging into and the way I'm plugging into it. Right. And I'm getting an aspect of that part of me is getting nurtured and nourished and fed. And then like, oh, I go over here and do that. And sometimes I'll kind of bring some of the messages of the culture from one place to another. But you also quickly see like, oh, these people may not actually be interested in what's over here, right? And the importance is how it actually is in me and the integration of it. And the challenge becomes when I would forget that I'm actually integrated, that I'm not the separate, right? You're talking about like this one room, right? And instead of like me going into all these other rooms, actually they're coming into my room, right? Which is, and not again that it's kind of either or, like I'm just going to be me no matter what. But there's I think for me there was this overemphasis on even within that kind of how I was supposed to show up. What could I show these people? And if there were, what it also did, it compartmentalized things so much that I thought it was only those compartments with those people. And I didn't realize that also there were these other aspects of me which didn't necessarily get fed or nourished in these other, like, oh, here's the 5 places I go in the 5 communities. And they're like, oh, well, wait, what if there's like 100 aspects of me? Then these other 95 are just kind of hanging out like, I don't know, someday we'll get a seat at the table or something. I don't know what that is. But this piece around integration and whatever our notions of wholeness is actually much more important, or is differently important. And there's less, it's hard for people to find the spaces that support that, because there's so much of, oh, this is, systems that say this is who you are and this is how you're allowed to show up in them. And so there's not a lot of practice that people have about being any differently, though they know that there's this, something's not right, something is off, right? I'm not satisfied. There's, the purpose and the mystery and the wonder that is my relationship and my life now isn't getting touched and getting fed and isn't finding a way to be. And that then can lead to, numbness and checking out, or risky behaviors, thrill seeking, like, oh, life has got to be the big thing, right? Or running from it, which can lead to all kinds of stuff.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I have a lot of conversations around wholeness and identity, and I'm always struck by, particularly with sisters. I don't know if Black men ever have this feeling of not feeling like they are welcomed in spaces, or questioning their, you know what I mean, or questioning their education and their right to be in a space, whether they're hired to be in a space, whether they're showing up as an artist in a space. There is this imposter syndrome conversation that is, quite frankly, quite new to me. I don't understand it, and I don't have to understand it to sort of empathize with it and hear it and just sort of push back on it a little bit as best I can. But there's a lot of this conversation about wholeness, and not just let me go and have a massage and let me do some self-care and whatever. But I think it's deeper than that. Like it's folks telling us collectively as Black people, you got to be 100 times better, and you got to be, 50 miles faster, and do you know what I mean? And you got to show up looking ready and presentable. So there's a lot of that in the mix that we can't seem to sort of shift from, right? Some of us can. I certainly have in my life, but I'm old now, so there's a difference. Do you know what I mean?
You're older.
I'm older.
So first, so as a Black man, yes, I felt that. So I imagine that other Black men feel those exact same things.
Well, we never get to hear Black men talk about that. Like, I never get to hear y'all talk about it.
That's different, right? Then, like, do people even feel that? Because I think there's a for many people, particularly marginalized folks, right, on the receiving end of some kind of systemic oppression, right? We're not talking about people who just think a thing, but we're talking about systems in place. And so there's constantly the message of you're not enough, right? You may have all these things, oh, but you got this thing, so that you're not quite enough, right? And so there are systems in place that reinforce that. And I actually think that in this conversation around imposter syndrome, it's important to understand that that's the cause of that. Because if there wasn't a system in place that said, that fundamentally questioned someone's right to be there, that notion, that doubt would not arise. Not in that way, right? Not as like it's because of who I am, right? I'm pretending and I just have everybody out. Like, that's because of systems literally were, and people reinforcing those systems with the gatekeepers of resources and livelihoods, and just saying yes to that person wants to be who they are, right? So we're talking about dehumanizing systems that fundamentally say you don't have a right to actually be a person. You're a source of labor, you're a commodity, you're a property, you're less than, you're for me, not for you. And so whenever I hear people talk about this, the imposter syndrome, so the language of that is newer, right? In terms of like hundreds of years. It's important that it is also anchored in a system of oppression, an understanding that's in relationship to that those things exist. That's kind of one aspect of that. And the other is that because of that, right, to get a kind of a seat at the table, these same systems are, to overcome this notion that I just think you're not enough, I need to see this exceptionalism, right? This demonstration of you being the like ultimate best of a thing. Then I'll just give you the seat that like right next to you, someone who's like mediocre gets to have because they just get to be in the room just because of however they fit into it, right? So if we're talking about race, so if there's someone who's white who just gets something, we talk about, let me put it this way, affirmative action is framed as a benefit mostly in conversations to people of color. Well, we got to make up for these wrongs that have been done. And if you look at affirmative action as some benefit given to a designated group of people, right? Affirmative action has been the course of this country's development from the beginning. There's been affirmative action if you're a white male landowner. You just get to get in the door, period. That's actually affirmative action at play. Not because of this notion of merit, not because of notions of skill or qualification, but like, you have these aspects of your identity, you get to be at the table. And anybody else who walks in the door, you have to prove that you can kind of overcome your less than-ness to then have a good enough buy-in to this system, and then we'll let you at the table, right? And so that has meant these notions of just to be there, right? I gotta be twice as smart. I gotta show up early. I gotta do all the kind of above and beyond, which is actually still no guarantee, because it is rarely about that thing, and it's about are the gatekeepers swinging the door open if you show up well. And as we know, it is not a guarantee. And it then becomes I have to demonstrate, it's like code switching. I have to demonstrate proficiency in another language just so I can be seen as a person. The people over there aren't demonstrating proficiency in other languages. I gotta learn theirs and speak theirs. And then I'm allowed at the table. So it means we start to develop very early that who we are is conditional. It's not just who we are that's actually valuable and is good enough or even more than good enough. But if we can kind of meet certain criteria that other people are defining and can change at a moment's notice. And so that piece around like what that exceptionalism is becomes like a humming narrative that can be dangerous because we can then internalize it, that's actually where our value comes from. It's different to say, I actually need to learn how to speak this language so I can get this job. And then these are the conditions that I'm in, right? And to remember that our actual fundamental value is not tethered to that. And if we get lost in that, we get lost, right? We actually get lost in our lives around like kind of who we are as people, why are we here, what's going on, how do we actually navigate and maintain our personhood in a context that is trying to dehumanize us. And we can get lost in that, and then we can start to perpetuate those things because, well, I had to do this, so I guess you've got to do this, right? This is just what the name of the game is. And then we start perpetuating the harm and the dehumanization that has been done to us. And we actually don't need the messages coming so loud outside of us because we've internalized those. So that's like what this internalized oppression is, right? We are replicating and binding ourselves, and we don't necessarily have to have, the chains on us in the same way. The person coming at us, yelling at us, you're not good enough, right? We have our loved ones saying it and internalizing it. We have the people who look like us saying it and internalizing it. And then we have ourselves saying it and internalizing it. Like, I'm the exception. I'm the good one. I made it. I'm different than all the rest who are actually just like me. Because I learned I got a yes from that system, right? They said I'm good enough to be here, so I'm a little bit better. And that's just a really dangerous and infuriating and heartbreaking piece of how we participate in our own dehumanization and challenges with it, and not to blame people on the receiving end of that, but it really requires an understanding of that so we can free ourselves from the ways that we imprison ourselves, the way that we lessen ourselves, the way that we dehumanize ourselves and say we're not good enough and we don't deserve and who are we to have, and I'm just gonna, they see me this way anyway, so I might as well be that. And it takes some access and some practice and some stepping outside of what the narrative of popular culture is and these systems are to find our way to ourselves.
Wow, that's probably one of the best explanations of that I've ever heard. That ought to be in a workbook so that we can go along with this in a way to get to some healing at the end, or at least some understanding of what we could craft a healing to look like. Because I don't know, one size does not fit all, and everybody's path is different.
Well, it's a work in progress, that this workbookiness, or not just a workbook, but for me, actually closing my therapy practice has really allowed a little bit more space for me to kind of inhabit some of these things in a different way and to talk about them and to share them in a different way. And so my hope is to be leaning into that a little bit more. But to go into this piece around there isn't one size that fits all. And at some point, I was just talking to some parents about this yesterday. This move from trauma or this kind of loss in this internalized oppression that we can be in ways that we are dehumanizing ourselves, we are distant from ourselves, right, from our own really beautiful and sacred nature, right. One aspect is kind of the recognition of that and the healing of that, but the purpose isn't just to kind of go back and keep healing and healing and healing and now this is wrong and this is wrong, I gotta undo it. But can we at least in those steps then start to turn towards the things that we're actually yearning for, things that nourish us, and finding, wow, what is this life for me? What is the me that is in it and of it and connected to it, right? In this expansive way, and then how does that look in my day to day, right? It doesn't mean I have to disconnect and just be this I don't know, floaty around person, because we got things to do, right? There's got to brush the teeth, got to make breakfast and lunch, got to go for my walk, right? Got to, pay the bill.
I like what you said, because I'm my story. I come from a great deal of trauma, and I don't think there's no healing that could ever heal that. So I don't come to it as if I'm broken in so many pieces that can't. You know what I mean? I don't come to it. I don't live my life trying to figure out how to heal that. because there's no healing of that in a way that people think about healing. What I have done is made room and acknowledged that this traumatic things have happened to me, and I acknowledge and I see it and I understand it. I have an awareness of it, but there's no. I often think people think healing is an erasure of what has happened. There's no ever going to be any erasing of that.
No. The way I like to think about it and talk about it, because it gets a little more concrete, is like a physical injury, right? So say someone falls or is in a car accident, right? This kind of traumatic thing, breaks a leg, and there's kind of two paths, right? One path is the healing of that leg. You actually need to pay attention to it. Like, oh, it needs to be put in a cast, and it needs to heal, and then you got to do some physical therapy, right? So that there's a minimizing of a lasting negative impact. So like 3 years after the accident, you can get around fine, right? There's a healing of it, and like you can kind of live your life in the way that you had. Now, there's still the memory of it, right? There's still the like, this did happen, my leg did break, right? Yeah. You're not, even though you can now run on it, you're not saying like my leg never broke, right? And it was like, oh yeah, and it really, really hurt, but you're not experiencing that pain because you addressed it. You were able to address it. There were resources to help you address it, right? You don't just like do it on your own. That's one track. The other track is, it hurts too much. I don't want to pay attention to it. I'm going to kind of keep going on, and it heals because, you know, our bodies do that, but it heals in a way that like there's a limp or there's pain that continues on. It turns into this chronic pain. So then 3 years later, this other person who wasn't able to address that healing, and it's not all on them. There's a lot of ways that healing happens and actually needs support for that to happen in a skillful way. But later on, the person is like, oh yeah, I was in a car accident, 3 years ago, and it hurts now, and I can't go upstairs, or I have to be careful when I do, or when the weather shifts, this pain shoots through. So there's literal pain experienced long after that accident. And so if that person is then like, oh, I'm just going to live with it that way, then they're literally living with that, and it's going to impact their relationships, it's going to impact their capacity, what they can and can't do, because not just because it hurts, but because there's been this unresolved healing. Now that person, really at any moment when they become aware of it, can say, I need to get this looked at. Maybe my life doesn't need to be about bearing this pain. Maybe something else. Maybe there's another way. Maybe there's some healing. Maybe something else can happen. And there's lots of complexity in this, right? So I'm kind of simplifying it for the sake of this discussion. But this person then goes to the doctor and it's like, oh yeah, that you had a break and it didn't heal well, and so it's causing you pain now. So we're actually going to have to kind of go into the wound, right? Into the injury. I mean, sometimes what happens with doctors say, well, we're going to have to re-break it so that it can set properly, and then you can go through physical therapy and do all the other wellness things that are going to be around it. And if the person can do that in time, there's new healing, and then it will not cause pain in the future. So then 3 years or so from that surgery, from the kind of repair, they're like, oh, I can like go about my day. I can do the thing. Now, the reality of the original break, the reality of it being broken again, right? Those painful instances aren't erased, but they then are no longer feeling the pain, experiencing the actual pain in the moment again. And so now if we change that from this physical thing to emotionally, it's really the same process. For trauma, to go back in, it's going to feel awful because a person has lived their lives managing and coping and kind of locking things up in a vault. But it's also meant that they can't go there because it's locked up in a vault. And they can't access the good that maybe they've got locked away in it too, right? If it's a trauma that involves loved ones or people close to them, right? There's a locking away of openness, of vulnerability, of trust, even to loved ones. So that affects people's relationships. That's the pain in the present. And so to go back and open that up is painful, right? Is uncomfortable. And with support can then help it resolve differently and come to a new place where there's access to the positive things that have been locked away, and it doesn't hurt in the same way again moving forward. But that's that process requires care, requires connection and holding, and this understanding that like I'm actually going to go into this place that's really unpleasant, uncomfortable consciously. Right?
Yes.
I'm going to choose to walk in that, open that vault. I'm going to choose to go to the doctor and be like, does it hurt here? And you're like, why did you do that? Like I'm choosing that for this longer goal and desire of some actual relief, much more sustainable relief, where I can now like, oh, look, all my energy is not about managing pain. I can just like go outside and not have how long am I going to be out for? Am I going to run into these people? Right? All the managing we do for the discomfort. And so then it opens up possibility for being in life in a way that's not solely focused on the pain that's connected to actually an avoidance and an unresolved harm that happened. And understandable, and can we come into a place of yearning for wholeness is a really clunky word, but like moreness of ourselves to really be present. Can we say yes to that and say I need some courage to really face some of these things I haven't faced before, because there's pain anyway. So can I like say, well, let there be some pain that's actually going to move and resolve, and then maybe shift away, and it won't necessarily be the suffering, right, that I've been experiencing.
See, I just like this conversation so much, because I think this is the piece that always gets lost when people have these conversations about wellness, wholeness, and all of that. Like, like there's no middle step. Like there's barely a beginning and no middle. There's just a focus on the end.
Yeah. There's no jumping over it. There's no jumping over it. And that's actually part of to me, that's actually some liberation. But you need kind of another narrative to know it. It's like, if you don't know that it's possible, if you don't know that like, oh, I'm actually creating some of these narratives in my head, and there's actually some systemic things at play, then I believe the narrative, which is just like, it's just me, it's my fault, I'm just not doing enough, I'm just not thinking the good thoughts, I'm just not pulling myself up by my bootstraps, I just can't do it, I'm just bad, like, which is not actually accurate. But we bought into that. But so there's an importance of like, oh, something else, right? Another world is possible. Something else might be possible. If we don't have any space about any kind of liberation, then we're locked within the confines of what we're told is possible. And there's, so that requires some like, sometimes grace and happenstance, right? We happen to hear a thing, we happen to meet a person, we happen to read something, and there's a part of ourselves that is always wanting and actually naturally heals. And so it's like, oh, I can be open to that now. Maybe I can feel something. Maybe I can feel sad and cry, and it won't mean that I will never stop crying. Maybe right? Maybe I can feel, just feel, and I'm not going to lose my mind, right? Or I'm not going to be taken advantage of. Maybe I can say what I want, and the person isn't going to laugh in my face or come at me, right? Because I'm not 5 anymore. I'm not 12. I'm not 16, right? I'm not necessarily in those places where some of those early things really got established. But again, it's, there's not a one size fit all, and I don't want people to think that there's just like a something that can happen is people can internalize, myself as well. You know, it's too much time has gone by, or like why couldn't I know this before, or it's just my fault, or I'm stuck in these things, or really blaming themselves. And so I think it's important to have a lot of, even as a beginning, can I have compassion for myself? Can I read this thing, it was like, no matter how far you go in the wrong direction, you can always turn around.
So, and who among us have not done that?
Right. Can we at some point, if we realize we're going in the wrong direction, can we at some point, one, just realize it? That's actually success. And then there's the practice of stopping, turning, maybe asking for directions, maybe feeling like I really know where I should be going and I just need to, maybe now I can do it, right? But it's a process, and like we just pick ourselves up and we just try again. And that is success also. Because the success is the like, can I be present? Can I honor something else in me that hasn't necessarily been honored in the same way?
This has been a wonderful conversation. And the fact that you'll be back, you'll be here every other week is a beautiful thing. So yay, everybody. Yeah. He'll be here every other week so that we can do just this kind of conversing around these issues.
All the things.
And I always feel very centered when you're here. It just gives me just what I need for the day and for the journey ahead. So I so wonderful. Appreciate you. So yeah.
Babz.
Thank you so much, Enroue. I will see you in another 2 weeks.
I will see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Everybody out there too. Have wonderful days.
Have wonderful days, even though it's raining. Rain is good.
It's happening.
It's good or bad. It's happening. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. All right, Harry. I will see you tomorrow for the Friday edition of Lovebabz Lovetalk. Have a good day. Thank y'all.
Morning.